Hi, this is Sybil Madison Boyd with the Digital Youth Network. This is the third of 5 sessions for the Chicago City of Learning trainings, and today we're focusing on badge construction. Up until this point, organizations have identified the learning goals for each of their programs. They've thought about the challenges or new opportunities that badges could address, and they've identified potential badges for the programs that they plan to include in Chicago City of Learning. Today we're going to drill down on each of those badges. So what you're about to see is a little clip that focuses on connected learning. The 2 principles that we're looking at today are social connection and peer-supported learning. And then we're going to walk folks through an example of how to drill down badges that you've selected for your program. And then we'll spend some time in a workshop really getting into the nitty-gritty of these badges. We're hoping that this is going to lead organizations to be one step closer to making final decisions about the badges that make the most sense for their programs, based on how they represent the learning experience and how they add value to the work that they're doing with youth. So today's principles, the 2 that we're focusing on today, are peer-supported learning. So learning that is supported, enriched, made alive by the fact that you're doing that learning with your peers, and social connection, how we connect with others through those learning experiences, and how that connection crosses generations, how it helps us feel like we're engaged in a culture that we're creating or making together, how we're engaged in practices and rituals that have meaning to us because we're doing that together.
Hook and see Medina's mighty black spade street, Stone Nation, Zulu, depicted a need for agriculture snatched back.
Kumalinks is a youth development arts making organization, and we utilize hip-hop, art, and culture as a vehicle for creative expression, for cross-cultural dialogue, community building, and preserving some of the essence of what hip-hop means to marginalized communities.
When I started doing poetry at first, I was really nervous. I didn't know what I wanted to write about, how to write it. When I got here, I got to see other people's poetry, how they wrote, like the little techniques they use. We are the roses that grew from concrete, and we wanna reach the sun. He goes by Black Lucifer to see that these kids reach no heaven. Seized breeds of smoke meat we inhale and we wander. How many bodies will get dropped before the government bans guns in Chicago?
We kind of root our work in the Mississippi Freedom Schools, and the idea of who better to teach and empower and liberate folks in terms of literacy than those who look like me and come from where I come from. And so for us, the whole peer exchange and that peer support piece is huge.
But just make it more compact. Yeah, it's the same, it's just tighter. I think that will it will play more into what y'all theory is.
I feel like, especially in a space like Kumalinks, you surround yourself around people who have knowledge on different things, or people who have knowledge on the same things that you have knowledge on, but a different type of knowledge.
We all feed off of energies, and we always give constructive criticism.
Because somebody can be my age and they're just writing at an older age, and I'm just like, whoa, all this is coming out of this 17-year-old that's the same age as me, same place as me. It kind of pushes me to be on the same level.
And whenever I'm not doing slam poetry, I like to go to the studio with the rest of my friends and make beats, produce, and record everything with them. So basically we're all friends, we're all collaborating all the time.
The community that we have here is very supportive of who you are, where you are when you enter this space. And that's like family. Happy birthday, dear Savior. Happy birthday to Their conscience is open to the idea that it's a life that extends from people who have been here before you to people who will come after you. That it's not just a single or individual journey, it's a community journey.
2, 3.
It's not and then pump again, it's look at yourself.
Mixed girl was me, running from the shadows of my dark skin, feeling like anything too black was a sin, so I separated myself from my skin.
Needed quick cash in this economy, raped by misfortunes, sold a few bags and got caught in a criminal's closet.
I might need it when I'm running down the street chasing dreams you told me I could never achieve.
Every slam, every performance is a learning experience. It makes you feel more full, more like you connect with more people as you learn more things.
Blast from the cannon that the cigarettes take. Corporate capitalists run your soul to the grave, service wells to the system that is driven by brains.
It's not necessarily coming every Monday, Wednesday, Friday and docking your hours, you know, just and putting in learning time. But as you get further in it, you start to realize this is a lifestyle change for everybody, and it's a way of changing yourself.
While you bust open another keg, we compose symphonies in our heads. While you bust your brains out in hallway fights, we revise our slam poems and make them right.
That my life will not be based off of A's or ACTs or my job's pay. Why can't it just happen my way?
I feel that's where the best learning comes from. If you're trying to find a way or an answer to a problem, and then out of nowhere, this poet comes up, just gives you the answer that you've been trying to find. It always tells me you are not alone.
I'm a mountain too high to climb. You can wait at the bottom, but I would never fall for a man who keeps me hidden in complete darkness.
So I sing for my father. I sing for the men who were not saved.
Yo soy mexicana 100%, no importa lo que tú digas.
If I had a voice, it would be speaking the words you never hear. You are beautiful.
Having a youth-on-youth component to this work allows young people the opportunity to feel valued.
They're talking about things that are happening in the world and how we have the ability to change those things.
And that's what the goal of connected learning is about, is really for young people to walk out of these spaces feeling confident in who they are and feeling confident that they make valuable contributions.
Anchored in ancient remedies, our valor gifts are wrapped in first suppers with urban deities.
Ritual is recipe.
Now is then. Points is passion.
Even if this happened 9 times, and one day 10 news channels would still say, we have more important stories to cover today.
I've been working in Chicago, largely around kind of a general theme that I think all of you would actually share, which is the desire to help young people understand their power and build their power. So this idea of whatever that is and identifying what that is for that young person and helping them usher that, whether it's through spoken word, whether it's through aquaponics, or whatever that is, helping young people discover themselves and how important it is for them to understand that power and validate that. And all of you are doing a phenomenal job every day at doing that. Not only in the design of your programs, but even just here, in the way that you've been discussing designing your badges, has been so thoughtful about how do you actually build that and translate that. But the second phase of that, and the second part of my career after direct services was, despite all of that amazingness, the world didn't see our young people that way, right? So you watch the news and you watch things, and all of a sudden all these knowledge points that we know about our young people are translated in a very negative way in the news and the public. So a couple of years ago, as part of a kind of college and career readiness initiative, kind of took on this responsibility about how do we actually translate youth power in a way for people on the outside could understand. Because we get it, kids get it, but the rest of the world wasn't getting it. And if you look at the statistics and the data on unemployment, those things really are going quite crisis level. So the urgency to translate that information about young people got increased. So when we looked about what is the best way to do that, what are methods that have done that in the past, we came across something that we all know about but never really thought about in that way, were standards. So how many people here love standards and believe it's a form of youth power at this time? Right? You're like, you're shaking your head. No way, not a single person in this room. I was just like that. So most of the work that I did was 15, 20 years, ex-offenders, high school dropouts, and standards were not part of any part of my discourse. But the more I got to know them and the more I started thinking about it, the more I understand what power they could have, which led me to kind of the badging movement and other things and all these kind of translational kind of areas and connected learning. So today I'm going to talk to you about kind of a little bit of the journey of what I used to convince myself to fall in love with standards. And then talk about what they're not, and they are not little ideological prisons. So we'll talk through that. But this up here, and we talked about unlocking power. This is one of my favorite youth bands. They're called Unlocking the Truth. They're actually a heavy metal band of 12-year-olds. They are incredible, and if you read about them, they embody everything you would ever want. They practice 5 days a week from the age of 7. They are incredibly focused and incredibly dedicated. And organizing people like this and young people like this are able to translate that. So we wanted to say that we acknowledge that being in a young band and playing in Times Square is a form of readiness and a form of standards. So I just wanted to like that. So I like them because they always keep me motivated. But this idea that what is a badge, right? So often when you've been building your badges, you're thinking about your own program and internalizing that, using your own language and your own vivacious kind of approaches. But for me, when I fell in love with badges a couple of years ago, what the potential of badge could be was this idea of it paying it forward, which is you have this incredible experience with young people. And in the past, not even out of school time, but teachers and schools basically gave a grade. That was the only way they could translate that. It means nothing. I was on a plane actually with a 10-year-old coming back from a badges conference in California. She was not at the conference, she was just sitting next to me. And I described it to her slightly. She was like, I totally get it. So basically, instead of just an A, my A would actually be representative of all these different badges that would actually tell me what I learned and tell other people what I learned. She was 10, I was like, thank you, you need to make a little commercial. And so for us, it was this idea, though, of paying it forward. So this idea of what you are building is not just for you. It is not just for your young person. Because you could accomplish that without doing all the badging, right? Part of the badge's power is this idea of connecting that learning, so moving that information across, but also sharing that out. And so at an elementary level or middle school level, maybe that's sharing it to a teacher, maybe that's sharing it to a parent. You know, parents don't necessarily know the skills. You come home from school and you're like, how was school? You're like, that's fine. How was your after school program? It was great. Parents get nothing. So they don't have a way to celebrate and cherish what their young people are doing. Their teachers may not. So I just want to introduce a little bit about the badge architecture, which you'll be getting into next week. So we talked a lot about translational power, translational engines, this kind of moving around. That is actually enabled through a really simple technology template. So before we used to do lesson plans on paper, but we all may have used the same plans. You have these worksheets. The goal is to translate that so it can actually move around. And luckily, it's really simple. And what's great about this is that if you were getting a badge in rural India, or if you were getting a badge in rural America, or this city, or in Shanghai, the badge architecture stays the same. So as a young person moves around and maybe evolves to go to college, maybe even just change communities, that badge model stays the same. So it's not as if this person receiving it or the kid can't follow that. The first section is really about context. So we talk about contextualized learning and the context. It really does matter. So the earlier video, we talked about verbal communication in a spoken word poetry program. Looks incredibly different than if you are doing a speaking program for the model UN, right? We'd love to have that merged maybe at some point. But knowing the context for your program, so being able to use the description, the badge name, and the badge type, and all of these to really give a robust contextualization for the skill that they had. And so whether it was like working unsupervised, was it working unsupervised at the lunch counter? Was it working in the field? Was it doing research? So people need to know the context. The second section gets around performance. So the criteria, which are what are the goals, like how are kids going to be held accountable? Kids really like clear expectations about what they do. Otherwise, they have no way of knowing they've met them. They have no way of celebrating. If you are a perfectionist young person, you need someone to tell you you've made it, or else you will continually feel that you are not doing well. What is the evidence that supports that? And standards really fit into that. So you may have thought of standards as kind of this abstract, kind of theoretical, but standards are a way to connect performance goals and connect your description to a worldwide network of learning objectives. So I just want to start thinking about standards as really being this kind of translational engine around performance. And then how you tag them. So these are all opportunities for you to think about all these different audiences. So at its simplest level, because we all think about standards in different ways. Often now we think about them as the Common Core, but standards exist in everything. We think about standards purely in educational, but often what we do, standards for the traffic light allowed us to get here today. So there's all over the world. It's a little bit like, design is everywhere. The difference is that it's just designed by a third party. So you probably have a clear idea of what the goals and expectations are in your program, but that really only has meaning for you and that young person. So a standard is just how some other group of people got together, spent a lot of time talking about what was relevant and what wasn't relevant, and decided what would be kind of a normed model for that. I'm going to walk you through some options for you based on the research about college and career readiness. So we're all kind of working with young people who are looking, eventually will likely need to go to post-secondary education or to a career. I always think I'd love to live in a country where there was like a third option, but that is pretty much where young people go. So research really shows that basic literacy and basic math do matter, right? And so we do have to focus on some set of learning objectives for academics. And that science is becoming it's always been a very relevant part of society, but it's becoming more and more part of it. Whether on the consumer side, like I got to understand this little DNA, little box, 23andMe, what does this mean? What are the implications of science? What are the implications of the NSA? So all these things are becoming much more relevant in an average life. So the Common Core standards and the next generation science standards are just trying to connect the country around common goals. The second skill set young people need are technical skills or talent, like some other hook, right? So some connection to a career pathway. So if I love verbal communication, but I'm really persuasive and I love selling, and every summer I've worked at H&M, this idea of what are your technical skills that can support that. Both of these organizations have literally free blueprints online. So if you're doing digital media, there's actually a digital media blueprint that actually can tell you what do people in the industry, each one of these is designed by an industry council, what they think of as kind of universally required to claim that you have one of those. So now you're attaching your program to a set of career standards. And I picked these also because they actually have tests you could buy. So if you ever get to the point where you actually wanted to test that, they're really inexpensive, normalized, and they give you good data. So that's helpful. The last two quadrants are 21st century skills, which is kind of a generic term for the social skills, the cognitive skills, the behavioral skills, the things that sit above content that make it come alive. So I always joke that Steve Jobs was not successful. Bill Gates were not successful because they just knew STEM, because they knew how to program. Bill Gates snuck out of his house every single night and broke into a library to code every day. That perseverance, that desire, that energy applied to technology is what made that come alive. So 21st century skills really sit in this area. And non-academic programs have been the largest driver of actually building these skills. So I'm always thankful when I see you coming in and doing this kind of work. And ASCA is the college and career navigation. So I was joking last week, we have made getting into college and getting a job so complex that you have to actually teach it as a discrete skill. So this is actually not like, people are like, well, if you were just good at goal setting, you could figure out how to get into college. So my general joke is that if a rich person pays $250 an hour to pay someone else to help you do it, it's probably complicated, right? So we actually pay a lot of college coaches, right, this whole sector. People pay a lot of money to help them write a resume. Just because you know how to write does not mean that you know how to write a resume. So this gives great guidelines for not only counseling around college and career, but the actual pragmatics. And this is also national association. So all of these especially have been nationally validated. We launched about a year ago because the standards around behavior were incredibly complicated. When we finally did our research, we ended up with 4,000 competencies and over 700 terms, which we have now reduced down to you, in something very simple. When you go really deep about what role standards play in society, which is partly my background in sociology, anthropology was, they have much more power than we give them credit for. And as adults, as we decide whether or not to align to standards or whether not to, we feel like it's a choice that we are making. But I just want you to know that when you make that choice to either connect or not connect, this is actually what you are maybe connecting or disconnecting to. One we've been talking a lot about today is this translational engine. So we have 400,000 young people enrolled in school in the city of Chicago, managed by tens of thousands of adults. Every 45 minutes right now, they transact between an entirely different set of language around often their skills, right? So they're transacting every single subject, and then they're going to after school, and they're going home, and there's no shared continuity. So over here it's critical thinking, over here it's problem solving. They think there's actually 400 skills they have to learn. They don't realize these are actually connected. And they're being judged separately. So they're not making those connections until you're our age, and you realize, oh, it's all about the academics, writing lots of terms. So that's kind of the obvious stuff, but I also want to talk a little bit about this ideas of policy, right? So when we value something, it embeds in how young people value, how parents actually value their kids. So in America, naming your emotions is considered a major value for social emotional learning. It's not the same somewhere else. So if you are a child that can't do that, you are considered not as actually undevelopmental as someone else. So these standards do end up permeating to decide not only how you feel about yourself and your parents and how everyone kind of judges you, whether we like that or not, but it's also why we took a lot of responsibility, and when you take on standards responsibility, to really fight for that. We actually hired a cultural anthropologist to co-build our assessments to make sure that they were culturally equitable, that we were not standardizing a skill that is really a cultural norm. So being articulate is a cultural norm. Knowing how to translate your skills across code switching is actually a skill. And so a lot of our students, especially English language learners, were never getting credited on assessments for language because the way we pinned it was speaking perfect English. This idea of also counseling. So for young people, a lot of our young people live in environments, formal environments, I'm not claiming families, that don't really value them, right? So if you're not doing the algebraic equation, you are a failure in my class, right? What a standard can do, and if you don't have someone coaching you, a standard allows a young person to say, there's this outside party that says these things are important, and I have that skill. So whether or not I'm working with that direct person, is I can look it up online when I go to ONET and look up a career and it says this is a skill, and I know I have that, I can make that relationship to myself. I can know that I'm powerful, that I have power, and I can share that knowledge with someone else. So these are all just different roles that standards can play. And so on paper, they might look kind of boring, but this is what they look like when they kind of permeate. So in our specific case, to kind of bring it down to the here and now, is that within your own set of badges, because some of you are talking about wanting to do multiple ones, you can use standards to tie that whole story together, right? And so you might actually do, maybe collaboration is the cornerstone of the community you're building, and you do just general collaboration there. When it comes to skills, they're actually breaking apart and doing conflict resolution in that part. Knowledge, they're actually learning how to facilitate an entire team, and they're actually taking a workshop, so they've built knowledge on the pragmatics of a team. And then showcase is that they're actually delivering a group presentation. So your standards can actually be the thread that connects in your own community. And then kind of pragmatically going forward, this is what we like, is that alignment. In the badge, there's a section on standards, which we are going to focus on alignment. So if you align to a standard, you can check that in the alignment section. So for the standards, like what standards are you aligned to? For those of you working in schools will know kind of there's that differentiation. But as you're building your badge and you found that you have actually fairly substantial evidence of one of those skills, right? So this is an entire team building. We actually videotape the team building. We show that process. They're doing a presentation. If you actually have evidence of that standard, in our kind of world, because we're establishing the rules because no one else is doing it, we believe you could move that standard to criteria. So when it becomes a major force in your program to have that skill and you collect evidence of it, you can move that, like I said, the alignment to criteria. So now in the standard section, you have all of that covered so we can connect all the city. But then for evidence, we talked about going to college or going to career, you have evidence of that skill that they can translate it forward. Places like DePaul have actually started using non-cognitive skills assessments as part of admissions. So we are actually just trying to push this forward because we had spent so much time on making them equitable and making sure that low-income young people could get just as much credit as wealthier students, and not based on the number of badges, but the content and quality within that badge. So the more power you have in there, the more likely they're able to translate that. Remember I told you about this 4,000 items and all this crazy stuff? We literally just made a deck of flashcards. So this is what MHA, when I talk about 21st century skills and all the big picture, this is literally all we mean. So you could open up your little deck, we've broken down through all the research to really break it down to 6 building blocks that were easily termed, right? So planning for success, what do you think that one means? Something related to planning to be successful, right? So not making these really complicated terms. Collaboration, and we used terms that were very straightforward. We worked with parents and young people and employers and teachers to come up with language we could all agree on. So we won't be not fighting down the road. This is actually done from parents of little children all the way through employers. And then on the back of each one, we basically just wrote, what would it mean to have, when you hear strong personal mindsets, what does that really mean? And we didn't just add more jargon, we just literally wrote, what does it look like for a kid to have that? So the way it's even written is observational. So bringing this down to the badge level, right? The criteria is something you actually saw and could document. We have tested, even by hiring an illustrator, to say that could everything on here actually be illustrated? Can it actually be seen? And where it's a process, we actually wrote it like a process. So for verbal communication, we often talk about speaks really well and conveys the message. You're like, well, what does that really mean? It's written as a process. So when you're working with people and they're struggling, this is also a form of intervention. And also, these are also written as assessment items. So we actually have assessment tools. So the exact same language translates across the board. There's no unpacking. We always ask people, do you love unpacking standards? There's not a single CPS person that likes unpacking standards. So we just went ahead and did it for you. But it helps you also give credit where credit is due. So I always like to highlight verbal communication because 3/4 of the world creates messages and a much smaller percentage of people deliver messages verbally. So part of verbal communication is writing Obama's speech. Obama is a speech giver. He probably is a good writer too, but he has a whole army of people who have full jobs just writing. But in the past ways these type of skills were described is you never got credit for actually writing the message, right? And there's people who are really good at signaling, right? So like, I can do that and I can give a speech, but I'm terrible at leading a group, right? So the signaling part I'm weak on. But it allows you to not only intervene to grow the skills, but it allows you to give credit in multiple layers. The challenge we found in this work was that you might go into in your teacher's lounge or your program lounge and be like, God, that kid is awesome. You know what he did today? I love it. I feel so good. It's totally working. And that young person's like off on the bus, had no idea that they did a good job. So the difference for us for standards is that why I do the storytelling is that it is not doing standards until your person actually knows what skills they had and used to become successful. Because they have no idea. You keep saying, great job, you are amazing. And they're like, what? That means nothing to them. They don't know what they were amazing on, they don't know how to repeat it, because in school they're told they're not amazing, so I must not be amazing. So it's the ability to be really specific when you say, you know, your speech was really great because you really checked in and signaled to your audience that so this idea of giving you that language, the way it's written, to be really detailed. This idea that standards really does sit between you and a young person. Then as those standards grow bigger and get captured in other things, they turn into kind of a connected learning model. But it really, at least for our work, it really comes down to, is a young person doing these skills? Are you giving them actual feedback on it? Are you helping them understand it through some kind of summative connection, whether it's a badge or an assessment or a feedback tool or some way that they can manifest that, and they can translate what they learn from this standard to another program. So when this form gets written out, you put them in this standard section of the badge, maybe you have criteria and evidence, and when that badge or that form moves over here, you can say, wow, like you're already growing on this. I want to keep pushing you harder on this, versus starting all over. So this idea of moving that forward, that's what a badge could actually do to connect that. So it's an active intervention model. It's also a translational model, but it also gives reward and connective. And also if someone didn't get it, if you are explicit about the skills that were needed, they know why they didn't get the badge, right? Because as you grow this, they're gonna be like, why didn't I get a badge? If you can be really specific and connect to that, that's also a great way, and it's written out quite detailed of why they didn't do it. If you go back in your own organization and say, all the instructors in a program, do what we just did, and everything you are all 100% agreeing on probably is close to looking like a standard, right? Because that's how standards really are. They're just like, how often is something universalized? So if all of you picked the same 5 skills, you have a fairly high confidence level that those are things that would be consistently built in your program that would be kind of safe to put into a badge. If you're not really even sure, you could actually have all of your young people who are leaving a program. Everybody check off what skill in this program you thought we taught you the best and most and strongest. So anytime, so that's where like, if you talk about big data, that's basically what big data is, like how often someone does something. But you can do this in a very organic way through storytelling. On a final note about storytelling, and so I used to joke that I made good grades only in school because I basically delivered exactly what my teacher wanted about themselves. Like, so they're teaching and I learned their passions, right? So my instructors really cared about X, and when I did papers, when I did things, I delivered that. Your real story about what makes you happy and what makes you feel most successful is largely what you care most about in your program. It's probably the things that you teach the most. It's the ones that you focus on the most. So you might actually have a standard that looks like on paper that you do it. So when you read like a piece of curriculum, when you actually deliver it, it's really what your passion that drives that instruction. So storytelling is also a great way to better understand what your program really cares about in their heart versus what they care about purely on paper, which gives a young person a better chance that they're going to get exposed to it. And get exposed to it in a way that feels really engaging. So as you're pick the things that you care about, because it's actually when your eyes light up and you're super psyched, that's what creates that youth engagement versus something that you actually is just a technical or element that you think CPS might want to hear. And then as we work together to prove that this is working, it's our job to validate to you that it was worth the effort. So thank you.
Thank you, Leslie.
This year I've been working on badges with DYN, and it's nice that they have provided a framework that you can just fill out. They give you a table, they describe what types of badges they have, and you can just easily map them on to whatever you're doing in your program. You don't have to have every single badge. If you have 3 skills badges, that's fine, and no community badges, that's absolutely fine. It's really about what works for you and your organization.
And so far, the badging meetings have been helpful. We've actually had a badging program since I've been there. It was there last summer, and the meetings, I guess, help us to hone in on the details that perhaps cater to the skills that maybe we missed, but it helps us to better our badges. More specifically, it's helping us to translate the badges into the CCOL infrastructure, because we have our own website, but now we have to translate that into something that's going to be useful in the Chicago City of Learning website. So it's been helpful.